Hey, my name is Robert Williams, and I'm going to be going over borderline personality disorder in this little presentation. It's something I've always found pretty interesting, and I wanted to explore it a little bit more for this assignment, so I figured I'd make the project about that. I hope you like it. Over the course of this project, I'm going to be using a lot of quotes from the author Kira Van Gelder. She wrote a book, The Buddha and the Borderline, which I read recently, which is very, very fascinating. So I'm gonna be relating a lot to that throughout the presentation. So first slide, what is a personality disorder? I'm gonna go over these before I actually get into borderline or anything like that. Personality disorders are defined simply as individuals with behavior and thoughts that differ significantly from cultural norms. So this is one of the things that makes it a little bit hard to define, like specifically. Since it only is based on culture, it's based on a little bit more than that. Specifically, borderline is based on a little bit more than that. But personality disorders in general are mostly based on culture. So things that are normal in one culture, obviously maybe not normal in another culture. So say in a culture where gender expression is more open, stuff like that, someone who is like super, super adamant about their gender and only expresses that kind of thing, that might be seen as personality disorder in that culture, but maybe not in a different culture. It all depends on that. There are three different groups labeled A, B, and C. Makes it easy to remember, but not the rest of it. Group A reflects suspicion and lack of interest in others, so that includes paranoid, schizoid, and schizotypal personality disorders. They often avoid people interactions. That's about the easiest way I can sum that up. Group B reflects overly emotional and dramatic reactions in situations where that wouldn't normally be warranted. That's where borderline is, borderline for B. There are other disorders though too, narcissistic and antisocial personality disorders, both in here. People in Group B have connections, but many issues with those connections, and they have trouble controlling their mood and their feelings. Group C centers around consistent dysfunctional patterns of anxiety. It contains avoidant, dependent, and obsessive compulsive personality disorders. So anything that triggers a lot of anxiety in these people, or they have trouble controlling it, things like that. So dependent creates a lot of anxiety from being alone, that kind of thing. They often lack confidence in themselves and assurance that they can do well. Normally, people with personality disorders often have symptoms of one or more of these groups, so they'll have a little B, a little A, that whole thing. It's more like a pool to draw out of than any specific classification, but each specific disorder will fall into one of these, but still might contain bits of others. Going over to the next slide, this is where we get into borderline personality disorder, classified under Group 2, as I stated before. Its main thing is instability. It's also often classified as a deep instability that manifests in emotions, relationships. A lot of times with their emotions, it's very hard to control. When those emotions are very, they're very heavy. They're very heavy emotions. So they'll go from being extremely depressed to extremely happy, extremely angry, and these can all be switched on and off in a matter of seconds. Not voluntarily, but there can be a trigger or something that makes them start feeling super, super angry. I have a quote in here from the book. The smallest things trigger me in an instant. I shift from a woman to a wild-haired girl kicking furniture to a balled-up weeping child on the bed. So basically, just little things can trigger rapid mood shifts, and it's very, very hard to control. The next symptom, normally impulsive behavior. A lot of people with BPD are addicts. Gambling, substances, things like that. Even Kira in the book is a recovering alcoholic. They make changes to their lifestyle, changes to their personality, all at the drop of a hat. Sometimes they'll just switch it up. Next up on the symptoms list, feeling of emptiness. A lot of them feel very depressed, feel very empty a lot of the time, which can lead to a lot of suicidal behavior. About 10% actually of borderline, sorry, it's all BPs. About 10% of borderline personality patients die by suicide, which is really, really sad that it's like so widespread. And that 10% is only the people actively in treatment, so it could be even higher. Most treatments start with just keeping the patient alive. For example, DBT, which I'll get into later. The first step of that is just stabilization, just keeping them from doing anything that might cause harm to themselves. And then lastly, on this list at least, they have a lot of trouble in social situations, so they'll be very easily overwhelmed, a lot of anxiety from socializing, things like that. Alright, so next up, I got DBT, which is, wait, no, that's not right. Next up is statistics. Borderline affects about 1.5% of the population. I found a lot of different statistics ranging from like 0.9 up to all the way to 5.7, but it's somewhere in between 1.4 and 1.6. That's what most things said, so I just went for 1.5. It's one of the most common personality disorders. About 1/7 of all personality disorders are borderline, which is interesting, especially because it's so severe. It most commonly affects individuals who have been through a traumatic experience, with about 70% of people who have borderline having suffered physical, emotional, or sexual abuse growing up. Maladaptive attachment styles was something I read about. That can often lead to BPD. It manifests in a lot of the relationships that they have, being very insecure. A bunch of attachment issues from childhood. That's what I got for the most part. So going on to causes and risk factors. There's no one cause that everyone will have. It's a mixture, just like the personality types themselves. There's a higher risk of BPD in those who suffer from abuse, as I said. Genetics as well. If their parents had it, it is more likely that they will, which is also very interesting because how would that even work? I didn't find the answer to that. Brain development is another thing. It looks like, from what I was able to research, the amygdala plays a role in the emotional regulation. That is actually either larger or smaller in a lot of borderline patients, as well as the hippocampus, which regulates memory, right? Yeah, memory and emotional control, as well as the orbitofrontal cortex, which is control of decision making. And then lastly, environmental factors. As I mentioned earlier, traumatic experiences are a big part of that, that may be causing it. So, hopping over to treatments. Dialectical behavioral therapy. Something like that. It means combining opposite ideas. It was developed in the 1970s by Marsha Linehan. It's a concept. Dialectical basically means, as I said before, combining opposite ideas, which is very opposite of what borderline personality disorder is, where they experience things on two ends of a very extreme scale without being able to, find a middle ground and control themselves in that middle ground. So it teaches people how to control their emotions through mindfulness, things like that. Just regulating their emotions so it isn't so, wildly variable. And it's seen a lot of success. It's the most popular treatment for people with borderline. I have a quote in here again. It becomes clear that these aspects of reality are often impossible for a borderline like me to grasp. I'm trapped in polarized extremes. The smallest changes in relationships devastate me. I experience myself as cut off and separate from the rest of the world, and I can't see the other side of things because I'm so caught up in my own reality. In essence, I'm not very dialectical. Or as Linehan puts it, BPD characteristics can be viewed as a failure of dialectics. Which is pretty interesting. It has multiple steps, not necessarily in order. It focuses on teaching and changing behavior. The three main characteristics. One is the fundamental relatedness of reality. Two is reality is not static, but is composed of many opposing forces. And three, based on these two, the fundamental nature of reality is to change and process. So it gives them more control over that change and allows them to process their emotions, things like that. It's really fascinating. I read into it just a little, and it's really neat stuff. But in here, I do have some other treatments. Cognitive behavioral therapy. Every treatment for BPD is centered at least a little bit around CBT, which makes sense because it's all about controlling behavior and emotional regulation. Mentalization therapy helps people understand how their inner mind affects their behavior. It teaches them to understand others before they react, especially in relationships, so they'll understand their partner's emotions and why they're saying that, and then react to it. Support groups also are very helpful. People supporting each other, sharing their experience, as well as sharing things that help them feel better. Most treatments have a crisis planning stage where they plan around crises, so people they can contact, things they can do to keep them from hurting themselves. Because the rate of suicide is so high, this is basically necessary. And as for medication, there isn't any specific medication to help with it, but a lot can help with the effects. So mood stabilizer, anxiety medications, antidepressants, all things that they have trouble with, that can help. Alright, and going down to stigma, it's probably one of the more stigmatized disorders out there, with a lot of information that it seriously affects the people who suffer. I have another quote in here that was pretty interesting. This comes from her friend when she called when she first received her diagnosis. No, seriously, people with BPD are really, really disturbed. Listen, I know you have some problems, but seriously, get a second opinion. You don't want to have BPD on the medical record. You don't want to have it at all. And the problem with things like this, it can really affect people getting treatment. It can definitely discourage them from going out and trying to, find a solution to something that would help them. Because it's just so heavily stigmatized. No one wants to have it. Well, no one wants to have any, but you know what I mean. Like, no one wants to be seen as someone who has BPD. And then lastly, down here at the bottom, mental health and mental illness. Mental health and mental illness are two different things. There's some overlap though. Mental health is something everybody has. It's like the body. Your body's healthy. And then mental illness is something that only affects certain people. Just like an illness affects the body, things like that. But that's about it. That was my presentation on borderline personality disorder. I hope that was interesting, because it was pretty interesting research and write about. So hope that was fun. I'll see you later.